Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Thursday, January 3rd, 2018 rendition or edition of the Joe and Joe Weather Show. I'm Fios 1 News Long Island and Fios 1 News New Jersey. Joe Rao is Fios 1 News Lower Hudson Valley. Let me just flip the light on. You should be here momentarily. There we go. Lighting is always very important. Good to see everybody on board. Oh, he's coming in now. Oh, that's all right. We all have things to do.
And I was looking for my glasses, too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they were right here.
I'm blind without my glasses.
Right. If they were a snake, they would have bit you.
Yes. Hello, folks.
Said Fred Mertz.
Yes.
Have you been...
I got wind of it.
Yes, you did. So, let's... let me make sure I got my mic. I always forget to turn it off, and I did. So... I have been, I think I'm going to try to figure out a way to create a temper tantrum needle, because the level of temper tantrums is rising with every single day.
Well, this is
to the point where I've gotten really good at reading. This
is day 49 since the snowstorm in November. Day 49.
49 days.
I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I looked out. Sure enough, on my wooden deck, it was covered with snow, very light coating. I looked on my driveway, which was more important to me, and there was nothing there.
Okay.
So everything was...
Well, you got something very few did last night.
What, snow?
Yeah.
It actually started before midnight. It was already... There was like spots of snow on my deck, and it had become a coating. But when I woke up this morning and looked out the window, it was all but gone.
Yep,
so.
That's the easy way to do it.
Yep.
So how many days has it been since the November snow, Joe? 49.
49. It was November 15th, right?
Yeah.
15, 31, and 46. Today was January 3rd. 49.
Yeah. I've gotten very good at really, when I'm reading people's comments, the more they write, the better sense I get of what they're actually saying and how they're saying it, and I have to really the level of frustration is just going higher.
Yeah, did you know
higher.
A year ago we had a near blizzard here?
We did. We talked about it last night.
Oh yeah.
But we're not going to show it to you again. You're going to have to go to last night's video to look at it, because if you don't, if you missed it, you missed it. But actually, in all seriousness, we've been talking about all these big developments, Joe, in the stratosphere,
right?
And I want to... No one knows how this is going to turn out. So, if you're standing there jumping up and down, saying that this is all going to lead to some sort of very bullish outlook for cold and snow, you're just as bad as the folks that are jumping up and down screaming that winter is over, okay? You're using emotion... and your personal biases to sort of drive your forecast agenda, and that is never a good idea.
Yeah, never forecast what there are forecasters out there who love to forecast with their heart and not with their head, looking for the first thing I did when I came in here today, earlier this afternoon, was I looked at the other meteorologists and I said, "Who's up for snow on Monday?"
You said, "Who are all these people?"
Yeah. Because, I figured, well, it's going to be cold on Monday. It's going to warm up again on Tuesday. Warm air shot of advection Monday night. Maybe the first initial...
Little warm front goes by.
Maybe a bit of snow at the very beginning. It's going to be mostly rain, but maybe a cheap throw Monday night.
All right.
Maybe.
So what I did today on my website post, Scott Briller, you go march yourself right back into bed, because you've got 102.8 fever. Okay. And
really?
Yes, he does, and he needs to take care of himself. So
good thing it's not 111.
Yes, exactly. So I wrote a post today talking about as I said, with the polar vortex split, but I also wanted to put out there all the other things that are going on, that just to show you that it's not just one thing that needs to happen. It's a whole host of things that needs to happen. And while the polar vortex flip is, a really, really important driver, we have to see what its final impact is going to be on that's in the stratosphere. So we needed to kind of reach down through the tropopause and start moving chess pieces around. Right. And if you look at this, and this is where we're going to wind up in 10 days. I jumped ahead to 10 days because this is one of the interesting things about this whole event is that the several weeks before the split, which happened on New Year's Day, some runs had the split, some didn't. Some had it one way, some had it another way, some didn't have it at all. But ever since the models have zeroed in on this idea of the split, they've all gotten very, very consistent. It's been days now that it's showing where you're going to wind up with at least 3 separate vortices, one going into Siberia, the other one going into North America, and another one, a smaller, weaker one, that actually goes down into southwestern Europe and northwestern Africa. So this would suggest, if this reaches down into the lower atmosphere, Joe, that this is going to be bullish. But I came up with a few, and more than a few flies in the ointment. First off, what do we have now?
You have your flow from the Pacific Ocean, which has been driving. I will say this: it's been above normal, but it has not been way above normal.
Right.
We've seen some winters where it's been way, way above normal.
And I think the reason why it hasn't been way above normal is because there's been this. There is a block in the North Atlantic. It's in the northeastern part of the North Atlantic near England, and I think its influence has been just enough that we keep getting these kind of glancing shots of chilly air that come in for a day or two and then they're gone.
Yeah, case in point, the beginning of next week, for example.
Right. So we've got this fire hose jet. As long as this fire hose jet is like this, and we could say that this is probably being driven by the weak El Nino, and by the way, there's actually the chance that we could see a tropical storm form in the East Pacific, which we'll show you in a bit.
It's amazing.
This has, if you're looking for cold and snow in the east, this has to change. And when I jumped ahead out about 10 days on the European, and the other models show this too, that fire hose jet across the northern Pacific relaxes. It's not, there's still some of it left there, but it actually does weaken considerably. You start to get more of an upper high building up or a ridge building up into northwestern Canada, so that's a significant change, and you're beginning to create a flow from Canada down into the eastern part of the United States. So this has to be repaired. If this doesn't get repaired, if that Pacific fire hose jet for whatever reason remains a big influence, that is going to perhaps put a fly into the a big fly into the ointment of those who want to have cold weather and snow in the east. And the other thing is, now in the Atlantic side gets a bit trickier because you've got higher than normal pressures up in the North Atlantic, which we I just said is probably the reason why we keep occasionally getting these cooler shots and keeping temperatures. So that actually remains there and expands and begins to shift westward. But the question is, where westward?
Right.
If it's too far west, then you'll have a trough in the east, but is that trough going to be along 75 west? In which case it'll be cold here, but it'll be dry.
Right.
It could be back in the eastern part of the Ohio Valley, which would be bullish for cold and snow. But if it's a little further west than that,
then they go all to the west.
Then they go to the west, and they wind up it gets cold, and then we wind up with snow to rain situations.
Right.
So these are all things that we have no clue on yet. No one does. Frankly, I find it encouraging that I'm seeing that a lot of folks that do the regular long-range forecasting, i.e. every winter is going to be an epic snow winter, are all one by one, and actually more than one by one in the last few days, they have all been throwing in the towel.
Okay.
And I'm one of these people that loves to be the contrarian and loves to see capitulation like this because it gets the noise out of the equation, because that's what that all is. It's just noise.
There's one site which I've mentioned on a few occasions here, weathertrends360.com, and they have been promoting an amazingly cold and amazingly stormy and snowy winter pattern against the grain of what NOAA has predicted or the old Farmer's Almanac has predicted. But what's interesting to me is, now I did not check that site today, but as of yesterday, they hadn't posted anything since the 20th of December, before the winter holiday.
Well, look, everybody's entitled to do whatever it is that they want. It does, in terms of a forecast. I don't really get too wrapped up in what other people are doing. I see what other people are doing. By the way, I also put up, this is the CFS climate model, which shows which has lagged the other models in all of this. It seems to be finally playing catch up. This goes for the next 6 weeks, and you'll notice that basically from about the 20th of January on is when we go to below normal temperatures going into the first week or so of February.
Right.
So this model is on board. I'm sorry, but just getting back to my point, this is one of the reasons why I don't do a long-range outlook. I tried it, and it just didn't work for me, Joe. I had I was too much, and I've said this so many times. It's too much for me to get my head around. I can't do it. Yeah. So it's not for me. I don't see the value in it, because I think for most of you at home, you're not farmers. I know some of you are, but I'm saying for the most part, you're not making weather hedges. You're not you're heating oil. If you're not in a business where it requires you to have a leg up on a long-range weather outlook because you need to hedge a position of some kind.
Right.
So from a practical purpose, I don't understand. I've never understood the obsession of wanting to know the weather 3 months from now to begin with. Other than the fact that I know where it's coming from. It's a snow lover, and they want the date and time and size and number of flakes per cubic foot for every single hour of every single day of the winter time.
I think it's in a way it falls under the category of entertainment. For example, the old Farmer's Almanac, the Farmer's Almanac, these companies that put out calendars that give you the forecast on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis for weeks and months in advance. People clamor for that. In fact, I don't know if you were aware of this, but the old Farmer's Almanac in 1939, they were sold off. I think to Little Brown was the publisher, and that year the new publisher said, "We're not doing these long-range forecasts anymore. We will provide weather long-term averages."
Right.
And so they weren't forecasts; they were averages, and you would not believe the static that came back at them, and they very quickly went back to doing the forecast instead of doing the long-term averages. That people want to know what might it be on their day of their wedding, for example, and that kind of stuff. So
my attitude with all of that has always been, from the standpoint of my weather page, and your weather page is your weather page. My weather page is my weather page. People sometimes will say to me, "Why do you write about this? You write too much. Why don't you write about that, the other thing?" You know what? If you want to write about something and you find it interesting, you take the time, go do the research, and you write about it. I write what I like to write. I forecast. I post what I think is interesting to the folks at home. You folks that are watching, and I'm open to suggestions. I've had people say to me, "Hey, did you see this? Can you take a look at this? Can you write something about that?" And I'm all for that. But I get people telling me you shouldn't be talking about the long range. And then if I don't talk about the long range, I'll get people say, "Why aren't you talking about the long range?"
They're going to get upset.
You know what? I'm getting excited now. I'm using my hands. The bottom line is, it's out there. If you want to read it, read it. If you don't want to read it, don't read it. Okay? That goes for all the things that are out there. If you find long range forecasting a distraction, I don't think the way I do it is a distraction. I'm trying to explain and get everybody kind of savvy into how things work. I don't tell you that February and March are going to be this, that, or the other thing. If you find that that's a problem, you should really not be paying attention to those long range forecasts. It's that simple. Anyway, here's the tropics, Joe. And you know something? This is really cool. I don't mean to interrupt, but this is really cool.
Right.
So, may or may not, there's a window of opportunity here for this to develop into a tropical system. It's got about 2 days to do it, but I want to show you something that was really interesting. So let me find that Eastern Pacific map. Okay, so it's that 10-10 low, that 10-10 winds low that you see there. And if you follow the moisture trail, now it doesn't really develop here on this. Of course, why is it stopping? Hold on, I'm sorry. I got the wrong time. That's why.
It's due to the government shutdown.
Yes, exactly. So here it is now, and it has an identifiable low. But look at that moisture goes into the Baja Peninsula and into the southwest. And when we look at the full U.S. map, and I'll put the rain and snow. But actually, that moisture from that tropical system winds up going into the southwest and producing snow in Arizona, western New Mexico, western Colorado, and western Utah.
Right.
I mean, I think that this is January. We see tropical feeds of moisture, but to see an entity that they're watching that could become a rare January tropical storm in the East Pacific.
It is kind of rare because I do recall in the Atlantic actually seeing the occasional tropical system that develops even in December. I remember one year, I forget the year now.
The El Nino year in 16, there was I believe the first storm, we had a January storm, and
right.
a tropical storm.
I believe you're right. But I remember many years ago there was one on Christmas Eve that affected Puerto Rico. The name of that storm was Lily.
Yes.
And so I could recall that happening in the Atlantic, but the Pacific is something completely...
Actually, because the last one, Anthony Orr, I call him my resident statistician, he's wonderful, he dug it up for me today. 2016, in the big El Nino year, there was a tropical storm in the Pacific.
Really?
And it actually...
In what month? January?
In January. It actually became a Category 2 hurricane.
Wow.
It was... it was way out, no impact, but that was part of the big El Nino year. And it's happened 24 times since 18-something or another, that there's been an out-of-season tropical storm on the Pacific side.
Right.
So it does happen from time to time. Just want to point out, in terms of the overall weather pattern going forward, Joe, is that, we talked about yesterday was the idea that as we move through next week and beyond, each one of these weather systems that goes through, it appears that each subsequent shot of cold air gets a little colder.
Right.
Okay, so the one from Monday sets up maybe a cheap thrill early Monday evening, late Monday afternoon, Monday evening.
Right.
There's this warm front goes by. Then it gets cold behind it. It gets a little colder for Tuesday and Wednesday, and maybe even into Thursday than it did on the previous shot for Sunday into Monday. Right. Then that goes out. Then we've got another front, and now this time we've got what looks like a pretty strong high with some bitter cold air coming into the plains next weekend that gets into the east, and this one will be even colder than the one before. So the point is, the cold part of this equation of this pattern change seems to be now coming into range, into closer and closer range. Right. So we're gaining a little bit more confidence with this. So it looks like that part of the equation may work out pretty well.
Right.
Now, whether the storm part of the equation comes together with regards to snow is a whole separate issue.
Right.
And we'll have to just wait and see on that.
A little chipping off a little bit more each time, as you just mentioned, from that main mass of cold air over the polar regions. And, a little. It's not all going to come at once, although I would say that when we get to the end of January or maybe February, I have seen sometimes situations like what we're in now, and then all of a sudden everything just breaks loose, and we just get one gigantic surge of cold air coming down, and I think that might happen later in either later this month or maybe holding off until February. So I wouldn't throw in the towel on winter just yet.
No, and again, no. Look, as I said earlier. We've got a nice audience here tonight. As I said earlier, no one really knows where this is all going. I frankly think that this is a good opportunity for those of you that are really interested in weather to really kind of sink your teeth into what's actually happening. And let's see what the result is. This could be a rather interesting run of weather as this all gets underway. We never really looked at these levels of the atmosphere years ago. So, I think it's I'm really enjoying watching this whole this whole thing happen. I had a blast back last February when we had that big split that time, and we saw what happened in March.
Well, of course, we also had a year ago. We also had access to teleconnection maps, which we do not have because of this partial shutdown. But hopefully, this will end very soon, and we can throw those maps in and try to figure something out.
Well, we can actually kind of very roughly figure out where we're at right now with the teleconnections. The PNA is negative, the EPO is positive, and the NAO is slightly negative. And I think when you look at the overall pattern, if we're going to go to a ridge in the west, trough in the east, that says the PNA is going to go positive.
Right.
I think the NAO is going to stay neutral to negative pretty much through the next 2 weeks. And I think the all-important EPO is going to be trending toward neutral and going negative, which is what when the East Pacific oscillation goes negative, that's usually cold for the East.
Okay.
So, look.
Meanwhile, in Europe, do we still have European viewers, you think, or people looking at us?
Meanwhile, in Europe, we always have. We have people from everywhere, Joe. We have someone from Wainwright, Alaska, on the North Coast.
We have one of those vortices that's over Europe.
Well, let's take a look. I could bring up the,
Are we going to have a repeat of the Beast from the East, for example?
Well, it all depends on where the vortex sets up, but we can certainly pull up the maps. I got to go to the regular GFS here, which will soon be history, and we'll pull up Europe and see what's going on. So right now, most of the cold has been in Central and Eastern Europe. And you can see that big high that's sitting over England. That just sits there and sits there and sits there. Meanwhile, the cold is really going down into Central Europe and actually down even into the Mediterranean, getting some snow in parts of Italy.
Wow.
But that high finally does break down, and you start to get some movement here. So here, this is the impact really of the snow. Look at that.
Yeah.
So this is down around day 10. This is when you're going to get a really cold push down into Western Europe, down all the way down. Look, it even goes down into Africa, which happened last year. A much more wintry look here over Europe after just at about the time we'll be changing. Is it about the time they will be changing?
Right.
What?
From here to Europe is like one wavelength or so to speak. So I mean,
I think so.
Yeah. So what's happening here could happen there, and of course that cold air oozing, as you alluded to, from Eastern Europe with time to Central and eventually getting into even Western Europe.
Well, here's the snowfall. It only gets to Western Europe and England toward the end, but this is very bullish in terms of snowfall amounts over the next 10 days across much of Europe, and down through Italy and down even through Greece and Turkey. There's probably going to be one of these stretches here where we're going to hear about cities like Rome, where it snows, in places where it doesn't normally snow very much. But definitely the split in the polar vortex is going to have a big impact on the weather in Europe. We got some time. I'll pull up the 2-meter anomaly just to see where it's below average. I'll just roll it back so we can start from the beginning. And
see all that red transitioning to blue.
Now you see where all the below normal is at the moment.
Right.
And now we go to next week and beyond, and you start that above average area just basically disappears, and then everybody's
Right.
Look at that. That's England, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, everybody below average temperature. So this is a pretty significant cold blast that's going to be setting up for Europe.
The key point is we've had the split. It's not going to be an instantaneous change, but it's going to take its time and coming in waves or stages, so to speak, so that 10 days to 2 weeks from now we should have more of a wintry weather regime as opposed to what we've been used to now. And maybe we'll put an end to the 49-day string, which will be 50
Yes,
tomorrow.
it'll be 50. And actually it'll probably run to about, before this is all said and done, it'll probably run to at least 60.
Right.
Before we get our first shot.
Absolutely.
All right, we got to wrap it up here. So top of the hour for me, Fios 1. I'm trying to read. Ryan Hastava says, don't bet on significant winter storms until January 20th, 30th. That's when the 14-15 winter woke up. Well, you're right about the dates anyway, Ryan. It was after January 20th. We were in a similar situation going into January 20th after we had no snow in November, very little snow in December, and nothing until the famous half blizzard, which was around the 23rd or 4th, if I remember correctly.
Some people, I'll tell you what, if it happens after the 20th, some of these long-range forecasters, they'll probably say the reason it's happening is because of the total eclipse of the moon that'll be on the 20th. And they use, I know a couple of people actually use the planets, believe it or not, and the moon and the sun to forecast the weather, not with anything that you would use here on, our regular weather tools.
From a practical standpoint, right.
So,
all right, anyway, got to go. FiOS 1 News, Long Island and New Jersey for me.
And FiOS 1 News, Lower Hudson Valley for me. And a lovely day tomorrow. Take full advantage of it. A wet day, a dreary day, it looks like on Saturday for the most part. And if you're doing anything out of doors, try to make it for Sunday. Although Sunday may be a little bit gusty, but still.
Yeah, especially late. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.